The glass tower glittered above the city like a monument to arrogance, a fortress of steel and money that bore the name Hale Enterprises in letters as sharp as blades. Inside, the boardroom stretched wide and pristine, a cathedral of power lined with marble floors and walls of smoked glass that looked down on the streets below. At the head of the table sat Richard Hale, the man who had built it all. His tailored suit was immaculate, his watch alone worth more than a middle-class home, and his expression carried the cool confidence of someone who had never been denied. Around him sat his loyal lieutenants, men in expensive suits, women with portfolios balanced on their knees, waiting for his command. Richard's fingers tapped against the mahogany surface with a rhythm that warned of his irritation. He did not like surprises, and this meeting was already one. A mysterious email had arrived at dawn, demanding his immediate presence, non-negotiable. No one summoned Richard Hale, not senators, not judges, not presidents of foreign banks, yet here he was, indulging his curiosity, irritated that he had allowed himself to be drawn into someone else's game. The doors opened. At first, the sound was what caught their attention, the deliberate staccato of heels striking marble, echoing through the room like a judge's gavel announcing the start of trial. Every head turned, and then the air seemed to still. She entered without hesitation, as if she had every right to be there, as if the empire itself bent to make way for her. She could not have been more than 21. Dressed in a tailored black suit cut sharp enough to wound, her dark hair swept back in a style that revealed the angles of her face, she carried herself with the poise of someone who had spent her life on stages grander than this, yet her eyes, dark, steady, unforgiving, were what silenced the room. They did not waver as they found Richard Hale at the head of the table. "Who the hell are you?" Richard demanded, his voice cutting through the quiet. His executives shifted in their seats, sensing danger but not yet understanding it. The young woman did not flinch. She set a slim leather portfolio onto the polished surface, sliding it across the wood as if it already belonged to her. "My name is Elena Carter," she said, her voice smooth, melodic, and utterly controlled. "And as of this morning, I own you." A ripple of disbelief swept through the room. One of Richard's lawyers, red-faced and sweating, leaned forward. "Miss Carter, while we appreciate your interest in Hale Enterprises, your stake, whatever it may be, does not give you the authority." "Majority," Elena interrupted, her tone as sharp as a blade. 54%. Richard snatched up the documents, his eyes scanning the signatures, the notarized seals, the dates and transfers. His hands began to tremble. Every mark was real. Partners he had trusted for decades had sold their shares he thought untouchable. Betrayal inked in black and white. "This is impossible," he muttered, his composure cracking for the first time in years. Elena leaned forward, her gaze never leaving his. "It's reality, Mr. Hale." He looked up, rage sparking in his eyes. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, one that never reached her eyes. She walked closer, heels clicking like the countdown of a clock, until she stood directly opposite him at the table. Every executive in the room held their breath as she bent slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. "I know exactly who you are, Richard Hale, cold, proud, untouchable, a man who thought he could bury his sins under marble and glass." Her eyes burned into his, sharp as knives. "You don't remember me," she said soft. Lie, almost tenderly, though venom laced each word. "But you should." The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard Hale, the untouchable mogul, found himself staring into the face of a stranger who clearly knew him, a stranger who had just stolen his empire while he sat in his own chair. And though he did not yet understand how, a shiver of recognition stirred in the back of his mind, like the whisper of a ghost returning for vengeance. The memory of Elena's words still echoed in the silent boardroom long after she left Richard frozen in his chair. He sat stiff, the portfolio of betrayal open before him, the black ink of signatures blurring in his vision. He told himself it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, some elaborate trick that would unravel the moment his lawyers investigated. But deep inside, in the part of him that still remembered what fear felt like, Richard knew the truth. He had just met the ghost of a past he thought he had buried forever. That night the city stretched out beneath his penthouse windows, glittering and cold, but for the first time Richard felt no comfort in the view. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, older than he remembered, hollow at the edges. He poured himself a drink with shaking hands and thought of the girl's eyes. They had pierced him like daggers, eyes that had not wavered, eyes that seemed to know the things he worked tirelessly to hide. As he sat in silence, another memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp. 2 decades earlier, snow had fallen heavy over the city. He had been 32 then, full of ambition, hungry for acceptance among the old money elites who now courted him like family. That night had been the Stone Winter Gala. the moment he had long waited for, the night he thought he had truly arrived, and she had been at his side, Anna Carter, his young wife. She had worn a dress she had stitched herself, a simple black thing she had carried with grace, but in that glittery room of diamonds and pearls, she had been out of place. He remembered the laughter, the whispers that were not whispers at all, cruel voices calling her a charity case, a girl plucked from poverty to serve as his decoration. Victoria Stone had been the loudest, her words dripping with disdain. And Richard, instead of defending the woman who had loved him when he was nothing, had stepped away from her side. He had felt the heat of shame, not at their cruelty but at his own fear of ridicule. That was the night he decided Anna would not fit in his world. That was the night he chose the mask of power over the substance of love. The memory broke as the sound of his phone vibrated on the table. A new email waited, no sender, no subject, only a single line of text. Do you remember what you said that night, Richard Hale? Do you remember the cruelty that ended everything? His chest tightened as though invisible hands pressed against him. He closed the email, poured another drink, and told himself it was nonsense, but his hand refused to stop trembling. The following morning he walked into his office, ready to reassert control, only to find a sealed envelope resting on his desk. Inside was a photograph, worn at the edges. Anna Carter, radiant and smiling, holding a baby swaddled in a hospital blanket. His throat closed. On the back of the photo, written in a hand he did not recognize, were 4 words that burned through him like fire. She was never alone. For the first time in decades, Richard Hale felt the walls of his empire press in around him, not as protection, but as a prison. Somewhere out there, the past had grown into flesh and bone, and it had returned to collect its debt. The first cut came on a golden afternoon when the world should have bent as always to Richard Hale's command. He was seated at his favorite table in the Jefferson Club, a fortress of velvet and chandeliers, where power dined with power. The waiter who had served him for years approached with the bill, his hand steady, his smile practiced. Richard slipped his platinum card into the folder with the confidence of a man who never questioned his own authority. Minutes later the waiter returned, his expression strained. "I am sorry sir, the card has been declined." The words felt like an insult, absurd and impossible. Richard's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Run it again." The waiter bowed slightly and disappeared, but when he returned his face had tightened further. "Declined once more." Richard's companions shifted uneasily, men who had toasted his victories for decades, now watching him with wary eyes. With a flick of impatience Richard handed over his black card, the one whispered about in hushed tones, the one with no limit. It too was declined. Then his corporate card. Declined. His emergency debit tucked away for forgotten times. Declined. Each swipe was a blow, each denial a chisel against the marble statue of his pride. The silence at the table thickened until one of his companions, Senator James Lowell, coughed into his napkin. "Richard, you might want to call your bank." Richard forced a smirk, masking the chill rising in his chest. "Of course it is a technical glitch. David, you will cover this, yes." The pharmaceutical magnate hesitated, just long enough to carve humiliation deep into Richard's bones, before slowly reaching for his wallet. "Of course, old friend, these things happen," but his eyes betrayed the thought already seeded. "You are finished." Richard excused himself, striding through the club with a face carved in stone though his insides churned. He dialed his ban. Keir, certain the error would unravel with one phone call. Instead, a neutral voice informed him all accounts were frozen pending investigation. Investigation of what he demanded, his voice cracking through the marble hall. "Financial irregularities dating back 15 years, sir." The line went dead. Stumbling into the street he tried his lawyer Edward Brooks, but the call went unanswered. He dialed his CFO, his COO, his so-called allies. Each number rang into silence. The city hummed around him with indifference as his empire began to crumble beneath his feet. Then his phone buzzed again, a new email appearing on the screen. He opened it with shaking hands. The subject line read simply, "Do you remember?" Inside was a single image, his mansion lit in the night, the words painted across the gates in blood-red letters visible even in the photo, "Justice for Anna." The ground swayed beneath him, memories surged of the night he had driven Anna out, pregnant and broken, the check he had thrown at her feet, the silence as she walked away. Now someone else carried that memory like a torch, burning everything he had built. For the first time in decades Richard Hale did not feel like the master of the universe, he felt like prey. And somewhere in the city the daughter he had never held tightened the strings of the trap with cold and patient hands, knowing the game had only just begun. The Liberty, grand, shimmered with chandeliers and soft music, its ballroom filled with the polished laughter of the elite. Richard Hale slipped in through the side entrance like a thief, though once this had been his stage. He had dressed with care, the last tailored suit he still owned pressed to perfection, shoes polished until his reflection shone in the leather. He told himself he had come to remind them who he was, to find an ally among the powerful. Yet the moment he stepped inside, he felt the shift. Conversations hushed, eyes glanced his way, then darted aside, groups closed ranks as if his presence carried disease. He moved to the bar, ordering scotch though he knew he had no account to pay for it. The bartender hesitated, then slid the glass across with a cool tone. "It is covered tonight by the sponsor." Richard almost asked who, but in his bones he already knew. A ripple moved through the crowd, whispers fluttering like startled birds. Heads turned toward the entrance. Richard followed their gaze and his chest tightened. Elena Carter entered the ballroom draped in a crimson gown that clung like firelight, her diamonds scattering light in every direction. But it was not her beauty that commanded silence, it was her presence. The room bent around her as if gravity itself obeyed her will. Behind her rolled an elderly woman in a wheelchair, face lined by years but eyes sharp with recognition. Richard's stomach clenched though he could not place her. Elena's gaze swept the room until it locked on him. That same piercing look he had seen in the boardroom now cut through layers of arrogance he no longer possessed. She smiled then, a small curve of lips that held not triumph but pity. Slowly, deliberately she crossed the floor, the crowd parting like water around her. The air itself seemed to shiver as she stopped before him. Richard tried to summon his old voice, the booming authority that once silenced rooms, but his throat betrayed him. "This is a public event," he managed, hating the defensive quiver in his tone. Elena's smile sharpened. "Invitation only, but I made sure your name was on the list. I wanted you here." She turned then, her voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's gala is more than charity. Tonight we honor the memory of someone the world forgot but I never did. My mother, Anna Carter." The lights dimmed, a screen descended, and suddenly Richard saw her face projected above them all. Young, radiant, hopeful Anna on their wedding day. His chest constricted. He had not seen that photo in years. Then the images changed. Anna pregnant and working nights. Anna scrubbing floors while exhaustion carved lines into her face. Anna collapsing in a hospital bed while tubes kept her alive. Each picture a knife. Whispers filled the room. A senator gasped aloud. "That is his wife from years ago. He left her." Others chimed in, voices trembling with shame or disbelief. "She was pregnant when he divorced her." The final image was of Anna's grave, a simple stone marked by wilted flowers. Then Elena's voice cut the silence. "She was abandoned by the man she loved, discarded when she needed him most. She raised me alone, working herself to death so I could stand here before you tonight. That man sits among us still. His name is Richard Hale." Every eye turned. Richard felt the walls close in, the circle tightening. He tried to stand tall, to sneer, to deny. But the room had already passed judgment. He saw it in their faces, the same cruel satisfaction he had once felt when others fell. Now it was his turn. Elena leaned close enough only he could hear. "They know who you are, father. And this is only the beginning." Dawn broke gray and unforgiving over the city when Richard Hale arrived at the tower that once bore his name. The gleaming letters of Hale Enterprises had been stripped from the facade overnight. In their place hung a new sign, bold and merciless, the Anna Carter Foundation Tower. He stood at the curb staring up at it, rain dripping from his hair, feeling like an intruder in the empire he had built. Inside, a woman with stern eyes and a clipped tone handed him a uniform folded into a square. Polyester pants, a stiff shirt embroidered with Carter Industries maintenance. "Minimum wage, no benefits until probation is complete," she said without sympathy. "Report at 5, shift ends at 2, bathrooms first, then offices. Any questions?" Richard wanted to shout, to remind her who he was, but the words tasted like ash. He took the uniform and changed in the basement, where the air stank of bleach and resignation. Other janitors prepared for their shifts, their conversation quieting when he entered. They knew him, everyone did. One man, older, skin weathered, broke the silence. "So it's true, you're the one who left Anna." Richard's head snapped up. "You knew her." The man's gaze did not waver. "She worked nights here, sweet woman, always asked about my kids. Shared her food when I forgot mine even though she barely had enough." The uniform scratched against Richard's skin as shame pressed down like chains. "She worked in this building, scrubbing floors while he conducted deals above her." He had not even noticed, or worse, he had noticed and simply not cared. They dispersed, leaving him with his mop bucket and the weight of memory. The elevator carried him to the executive floor he once ruled. Each step echoed with humiliation. The marble floors he had strode across with confidence now demanded he kneel and scrub. He began with the bathroom, his bathroom, the one with gold fixtures. He had personally chosen. Now he wiped another man's urine from around the toilet, the sting of ammonia burning his eyes. The door creaked. He looked up and froze. Elena stood framed in the doorway, immaculate in a white suit, her heels clicking against the tile. She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You missed a spot," she said coolly, pointing to a yellow stain near the base of the toilet. He bent his head and scrubbed harder. "Do you know what my mother's knees looked like?" Elena's voice was calm, but each word struck like a lash, permanently bruised, calloused from years of this work. She iced them at night, but by morning she was kneeling again. "You never asked, you never cared. She was furniture to you, less than furniture. At least you noticed when furniture was out of place." His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. A new sound echoed down the hall, sharp and familiar. The measured tap of heels Richard knew better than his own heartbeat. He turned and felt his blood run cold. His mother, Evelyn Hale, entered like winter, diamonds at her throat, spine straight, eyes that once looked at him with pride, now cold with disgust. "Show me," Evelyn said to Elena. Without a word, Elena handed her a tablet. Evelyn's hands trembled as she scrolled through images. Anna pregnant and working nights, Anna in labor alone, Anna collapsing from exhaustion. Tears streaked through Evelyn's carefully painted makeup. "I believed you when you said she wasn't right for our family," Evelyn whispered. "I thought she was after your money, but she never cashed the check, did she? She was the only one who ever truly loved you." Evelyn unclasped the family heirloom from around her neck, a diamond necklace passed down for generations, and placed it into Elena's hands. "This belongs to you. You are my granddaughter, the only good thing to come from my son's miserable life." She turned to Richard one final time. "You are no longer my son, everything I have goes to her." Then she walked away, her heels striking the marble like the sound of a door slamming shut forever. Richard stood alone in the bathroom, hands raw from bleach, knees aching, his own mother's rejection echoing in his skull. Elena's gaze lingered only a moment before she, too, turned to leave. "Finish the bathrooms," she said, "then the offices. Make sure you clean under the desks, that is where men like you hide their sins." The city was alive with flickering lights when Richard Hale stumbled through the rain, clutching the collar of his cheap janitor's uniform against the cold. He had just finished scrubbing the marble floors of what used to be his empire, his body aching in places he never knew could ache. All he wanted was to vanish into the dark, to find a corner of the world where no one knew his name. But anonymity was a luxury no longer afforded to him. As he passed a row of electronics stores, the sky itself seemed to turn against him. Screens across Times Square lit up at once, their glow stretching over the crowd that had gathered despite the drizzle. The same title blazed across every billboard, every screen, every television in every shop window: "The Price of Abandonment, A Daughter's Quest for Justice." Richard froze. His own younger face filled the screens, smiling, proud, untouchable. Then came Anna's image, soft and radiant, her eyes full of love. The voice that followed chilled his blood. Elena's voice, steady and merciless, narrating a story that belonged to the both of them. "This is Anna Carter," she said, "my mother. At 22 she dreamed of being a teacher. At 23 she married Richard Hale. At 24 she was abandoned, pregnant and alone." The screen shifted. Photos and videos Richard had long forgotten now burned in high definition. Anna at Tio. He gala in her simple black dress, mocked by the wealthy. Anna walking home in the snow with tears frozen on her cheeks. Anna cleaning office floors, heavy with child, her body breaking while her spirit refused to bow. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Strangers lifted their phones to record his humiliation in real time. Someone pointed. "That's him, that's Richard Hale, the monster who left her." Richard turned away, but the images followed him. The documentary was everywhere: restaurants, taxis, subway platforms. Anna's life was playing on a loop, and with each frame his cruelty was stripped bare before the world. His own voice emerged, captured on some long-buried recording. "She embarrasses me, look at her dress, she shops at discount stores, she's not fit to be by my side." The crowd around him erupted with disgust. A mother covered her child's ears, a man spat at Richard's shoes, a teenager lifted her phone, recording his face for her audience to devour. "Say something," she shouted. "Tell the world why you left her." Richard pushed through them, stumbling into a cafe, but there too the documentary played on a mounted screen. This time it showed Anna in a hospital bed, tubes running into her arms, her face pale but still smiling for her daughter. "The doctors said her heart was failing," Elena narrated, "but the truth is it broke years earlier when the man she loved cast her aside." Everywhere Richard turned, he saw Anna's suffering reflected back at him, magnified for all to witness. The documentary was not just about her life, it was about his destruction. Former business partners appeared on screen, detailing his betrayals. Secretaries told stories of his cruelty. Even women he had used and discarded stood before cameras, painting him as a predator who fed on innocence. By nightfall, Richard tried to retreat to the shelter where he had been sleeping, but posters of Anna covered its walls now, plastered with slogans: "Justice for Anna, hope for the abandoned." A crowd stood outside, blocking the doors. No sanctuary for him. He begged the manager for mercy, but she only shook her head. "I am sorry, Richard, the Carter Foundation funds us now, you are not welcome here." So he wandered the streets, the voice of his daughter haunting every block, every screen. "My mother died at 43, Elena declared, her voice like thunder. She died with his business card in her hand, still believing he was a good man who lost his way. But I am here to show the world the truth. He was not lost, he chose, and tonight the world chooses to remember her and forget him." Richard stumbled into an alley, sinking to the wet ground as the glow of screens burned overhead. For the first time in his life, he was no longer Richard Hale, empire builder and millionaire. He was Richard Hale, the man who abandoned a pregnant wife and killed her with neglect, and now the entire world knew it. The rain had not stopped in 3 days when Richard Hale's phone rang, a cheap prepaid device he had bought with what little cash he could scrounge, buzzing against the cracked pavement where he had slept. His hands shook as he answered, clinging to the voice like a drowning man to driftwood. "Mr. Hale, my name is Daniel Pierce." The tone was warm, polished, professional. "I represent Miss Elena Carter. She has asked me to offer you a chance." Richard sat up, heart pounding. A chance. The word itself tasted like salvation. What kind of chance, he asked, his voice cracked from hunger and sleepless nights. "Tomorrow noon at the Carter Tower," Daniel explained, "a press conference. If you publicly acknowledge paternity, apologize for abandoning Anna Carter, and sign over your remaining offs. Whore funds to the Anna Carter Foundation, Miss Carter will halt all actions against you." Richard froze. Offshore funds, they had found the Cayman account. $3 million, the last hidden piece of his empire, the lifeline he had guarded for decades. Losing it meant nothing left. But then again, he already had nothing. If sacrificing it bought him peace, perhaps even forgiveness, was it not worth the cost? He whispered yes before the man even finished speaking. The next day he stood in a conference room at Carter Tower, cameras flashing like lightning, journalists packed shoulder to shoulder. The suit he wore was crisp, provided by Elena's people, but it fit like a costume on a man who no longer belonged to power. Elena sat in the front row, her white suit immaculate, her expression carved from stone. A statement was placed before him, his throat dried as he read it aloud, every word tearing flesh from bone. "I am the father of Elena Carter. I abandoned her mother, Anna Carter, when she was pregnant. I divorced her on Christmas Eve, leaving her with nothing. My cruelty condemned her to poverty and ultimately to an early death." Gasps echoed across the room. Cameras zoomed in as Richard's hands shook, his voice cracking. He signed the transfer documents, surrendering the last of his fortune. Then came the final line: "I apologize to my daughter, Elena Carter, and to the memory of Anna Carter. I am sorry." The words hung heavy in the air. For a heartbeat, Richard thought he saw mercy flicker in Elena's eyes. Relief flooded him, a dizzying rush that nearly brought him to his knees. Perhaps it was over, perhaps she would finally let him breathe. But Elena rose and stepped to the podium. "Thank you, Richard, for that performance," she said, her voice carrying sharp and clear. "I am sure everyone was deeply moved by your sincerity." The room shifted, whispers grew louder. Performance, the word was a blade. She turned to the cameras. "Richard Hale has confessed to abandoning his pregnant wife and unborn child. He has admitted to cruelty that ended in death, and he has signed over stolen funds, funds I have already distributed to the families he ruined with his greed." Behind her the screen lit up with names and numbers, each dollar from his Cayman account tagged to a victim. The Thompsons whose father had taken his life after Richard seized their company, the Harrisons whose daughter had died without treatment after he terminated their insurance. One by one the faces of his victims filled the screens. Richard's knees buckled. "You promised," he croaked, "you said you would stop." Elena's eyes turned to him, cold and merciless. "Just as you promised my mother you would love her forever, just as you promised to care for her when she had nothing. Do you understand now how it feels to believe in hope only to watch it shatter?" The doors opened, federal agents walked in, badges gleaming. "Richard Hale, you are under arrest for tax evasion, wire fraud, and securities fraud." His arms were yanked behind his back, cold steel biting into his wrists. Cameras swarmed closer, recording every second of his fall. As they dragged him past her, Richard whispered, "This is revenge, not justice." Elena leaned in close enough that only he could hear. "Justice would have been giving my mother back her life. This is consequence." The crowd erupted in shouts as he was taken away, the flash of cameras burning his face, and in that moment Richard realized Elena had not only stripped him of wealth, reputation, and freedom, she had given him the one thing more cruel than loss: she had given him false hope, then crushed it in front of the world. The walls of federal detention smelled of bleach and despair when Richard Hale was led into a windowless consultation room. A stack of papers already waited on the St. Eel table. His court-appointed lawyer Paul Jenkins sat across from him, his tired eyes avoiding Richard's. "You need to see this," he said quietly, sliding the top document forward. Richard recognized it immediately: the prenup he had forced Anna to sign 2 days before their courthouse wedding. For years that contract had been his proudest safeguard, the fortress that kept his empire untouchable. He had insisted on every clause, every line, convinced that it made him invincible. Now Jenkins's yellow highlighter circled words that felt like bullets aimed straight at him. Section 7, subsection C. In the event of divorce initiated by the husband without cause of adultery, abuse or abandonment, any offspring produced during the marriage shall inherit full claim of all marital assets upon reaching the age of majority. Richard's voice cracked. "What does this mean?" Jenkins leaned forward. "It means everything you built in those 3 years with Anna, every dollar, every acquisition, every deal legally belongs to Elena, and the law recognizes her as your heir because she was conceived during the marriage. Your own clause did this. You locked yourself in a prison of your own making." Richard felt the room tilt around him. He whispered no again and again, but his lawyer only pushed forward another file. "Medical records, the DNA test, the proof. You wrote this clause thinking Anna would never fight back. You wrote it to keep her quiet, but it made her daughter the rightful owner of your fortune." The door opened and the temperature in the room dropped. Elena Carter entered dressed in navy silk, her heels striking the floor like the tolling of a bell. Behind her walked a man bent with age but sharp-eyed: Edward Brooks, Richard's former lawyer, the one who had begged him not to include the dangerous clause. "I told you this would happen," Brooks said, his voice dry as dust. "You laughed in me. I face Richard. You called Anna naive. You said she would never use it against you. You were wrong." Elena spread documents across the table, each stamped, each notarized. "Do you see this?" she said, her voice steady. "Every acquisition you made after those first 3 years traced back to the original assets. The empire you thought was yours was seeded with marital capital. It all belongs to me now." She opened a portfolio revealing a chart mapped like a spider's web. Every company, every building, every offshore account traced to its poisoned root. Compound interest and leveraged buyouts ballooned into billions. "Your paranoia built me into one of the wealthiest women in America. You built the weapon that destroyed you." Richard's breath came shallow. He clutched the edge of the table as if it could anchor him. "You cannot erase me," he rasped. "My name is on buildings, my legacy is everywhere." Elena's eyes were merciless. "Look again." She held up a news article. "The Sterling Financial Building now bears my mother's name. Your scholarships renamed, your foundations rededicated. Even your memoir pulled from shelves. The world will remember Anna Carter and her daughter. You will be nothing more than a footnote in our story." Her heels clicked as she turned to leave, but not before she whispered the final blow. "You thought you were clever, father, but clever men die by their own tricks, and now you will live long enough to watch your empire wear my mother's name." Richard's knees buckled beneath the weight of the truth. The contract he once wielded like a sword had become the knife at his own throat. He had destroyed himself with his own arrogance, and Elena had only handed him the mirror to watch it happen. The prison library was silent except for the hum of flickering lights when Richard Hale unfolded the morning paper. His hands trembled as he read the headline splashed across the front page: "Elena Carter becomes the youngest billionaire in America." The photograph beneath showed H. A radiant and unshakable, standing in the very boardroom he had once ruled. The article did not even call it Hale Enterprises anymore. It was the Anna Carter Foundation Tower. Richard's throat tightened, but the true blow came from the second story printed beside it. Oliver Grant, his former ally, his drinking companion, his best man at his second wedding, had given an exclusive interview. He confessed to enabling Richard's cruelty for years, laughing when Anna was mocked, staying silent when Richard destroyed families. He announced he was donating half his wealth to Elena's foundation in penance. Richard stared at the words until the ink blurred. Even the men who had once shared his victories now aligned themselves with his daughter. Around him, prisoners gathered by the television as the news shifted to live coverage. Richard looked up and froze. The screen showed his mansion, the crown jewel of his empire, now draped in banners that read "The Anna Carter House." Elena stood at a podium outside, her voice strong and clear. This mansion once symbolized excess built on cruelty. Today it opens as a sanctuary for women and children abandoned as my mother was abandoned. The camera panned across rooms Richard had once cherished, his marble bathroom now filled with cribs, his private study transformed into a therapy space for survivors, his gym a playroom, his wine cellar a pantry, every corner of his home repurposed for compassion. The crowd applauded, but Richard felt each cheer like a nail hammered into his coffin. His jaw clenched as other voices filled the broadcast. Former employees testified about his greed, his betrayals, his callous decisions. Men whose companies he had gutted. Women fired while on maternity leave. Families foreclosed on during Christmas. Each story aired before millions, each one adding weight to the chains around him. Inmates muttered around him, shaking their heads. Even criminals despised him now. One man he recognized, Malcolm Turner, whom Richard himself had framed years ago, leaned close. "She is not just taking your fortune," he said, "she is erasing you, your name, your legacy, even your crimes. Soon no one will remember you except as a warning." That evening a guard called him to the visiting room. Richard shuffled forward, his wrists raw from the cuffs. He expected no one but found Elena waiting, dressed in flawless white, her eyes merciless. She placed a worn journal on the table between them and spoke only once. "This is my mother's diary, read it, understand what you destroyed." She left before he could reply. Richard opened the book with shaking fingers and Anna's voice spilled out across the pages. Lines written in sorrow and love. "The baby kicked today, but I had no one to share it with. I still wish Richard happiness, though he left me with nothing." Her final entry, written a week before her death, carved through his soul. "I forgive him not for his sake, but for mine, and for Elena's. Love is too heavy to bury with hate." Richard's tears dripped onto the pages, blurring her handwriting. Forgiveness from the woman he had broken, forgiveness he could never return. Back in his cell he turned on the prison television. The broadcast showed Elena at Anna's grave, unveiling a new headstone of black marble carved in gold. "Emily Carter, beloved mother, unbroken spirit, forever loved," and beneath it words that would outlive Richard himself. "Her sacrifice built an empire of compassion." The crowd around the grave erupted in applause as butterflies were released into the sky. Elena raised her eyes to the cameras and spoke directly, as if through the screen, to him. "My mother is immortal. Richard Hale is forgotten." He felt the cell close tighter around him, though no one had touched the lock. The final demolition had begun. The 20th anniversary of Anna Carter's death dawned with soft rain falling over the city. Crowds lined the streets outside a gleaming new landmark, the Anna Carter Memorial Museum, built on the ruins of Richard Hale's former headquarters. The tower he once ruled had been torn down brick by brick until nothing remained of his empire. In its place rose a monument to the woman he had tried to erase. Elena stood before thousands, her hair pinned back, her voice steady with the weight of history. Behind her, the museum glowed with glass walls etched with Anna's name. Inside, every room told a different chapter of her mother's life. Childhood photographs of Anna laughing with her books and sketches. College acceptance letters she never had the chance to use. A display of her wedding dress stitched by her own hands. Then the darker rooms, photographs of her working 3 jobs, swollen with pregnancy, mopping floors until her knees bled. Medical reports of her failing heart. A small glass case holding the uncashed check Richard had thrown at her feet, labeled "the price he put on her life." But the museum did not end in sorrow. The final halls celebrated resurrection. Families housed through the foundation, children who received scholarships, women who rebuilt their lives because Anna's daughter turned pain into power. Elena's voice rang through the chamber. "My mother died thinking she was worthless, but her life was worth more than all the fortunes of men who build empires on cruelty. Her sacrifice will live forever." In the prison common room, Richard Hale watched on a small flickering television. Age and time had reduced him to a hollow shadow. His hair was gray, his hands calloused from years of labor. Around him the inmates whispered, but none came near. Even here he was untouchable, not with respect but with disgust. The broadcast shifted to a sealed chamber within the museum. The camera revealed walls covered not with Anna's memory but his. Photographs of Richard through every stage of his rise. Buildings once bearing his name. Lavish parties with senators and bankers. At the center a single plaque written in black stone. Richard Hale, 1952, forgotten. The man who abandoned his family and built his wealth on cruelty. His legacy erased, his name sealed in silence. Elena's voice was final as she held up a key. "This room will be locked forever. He does not deserve remembrance, not even as a warning. He will vanish as though he never existed." She handed the key to Anna's mother, who whispered through her tears, "My daughter is immortal. The man who killed her is nothing." The crowd erupted in applause as the doors closed with a heavy clang. Outside, children released doves into the sky. The mayor declared the date Anna Carter Day. The city sang her name while Richard sat hunched on a plastic chair inside his prison, watching the life he traded for greed turned into glory for the woman he had destroyed. That night the rain washed the streets clean. Elena stood at her mother's grave whispering, "Mama, he is erased. You are eternal." In his cell Richard lay staring at the ceiling, his legacy gone, his family gone, his name buried beneath the world's contempt. He had once believed death was the worst fate, but he was wrong. The worst fate was to live long enough to see himself forgotten while the woman he discarded was remembered forever. The story ended not with his power but with her immortality.